All right, continuing on with lesson 1-3, we're going to start with distance, midpoints, and talk about bisectors. So what is the distance? Distance is nothing more than a fancy word for length. Length and distance mean the same thing. Midpoint. When I'm defining terms in geometry, I can only use other geometric terms that we've already defined. So, midpoint we're going to define as a point that divides a segment into two congruent segments. Now, if you remember from the discussion we had earlier, if I have congruent segments like this, remember, if I want to show two segments are congruent, I can use the tick marks, or we have the congruent symbol. Okay? So a midpoint, again, is a point that divides a segment into two congruent segments. If you have a midpoint established, you can then have a segment bisector. Segment bisector would be any segment, line, ray, or plane that intersects a segment at its midpoint. So if you have a midpoint of a segment, anything that goes through it is then considered its bisector. It cuts it exactly in half, two equal parts. Distance formula. There's two formulas for the distance. There's one if I'm finding the distance on just a number line, or if I'm looking at the coordinate plane and talking about the x-y axis. The distance formula on a number line is you take the absolute value of the difference of the coordinates. You find both of your coordinates, subtract their values, and then take the absolute value. Why do you take the absolute value at the very end? Because in geometry, when we're talking about distance or length, we cannot have a negative distance or negative length. In the coordinate plane, we have this formula, because now we're dealing with x's and y's. So the distance in the coordinate plane is the square root of x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus the quantity of y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. Okay? The sub 1 and the sub 2's, remember, they don't have any numerical value. They just tell me that this was the first x, that was the second x. That was the first y value, that was the second y value. All of these formulas that we're talking about today can be found on your formula sheet, which is listed under your class resources. Midpoint formula. M for midpoint, x sub 2 plus x sub 1 divided by 2, comma, y sub 2 plus y sub 1 divided by 2. That's how you find your midpoint. You're going to find the middle of 2 points in the coordinate plane. That's it for definitions and formulas. We're going to move on and actually look at some examples. Okay, example 1. They want us to find the length of RS. Remember, if I have two capital letters with no symbol above it, that means the length of segment RS. Looking at my picture, I have some information already given to me. RT is 21.7. Also on my diagram, there's a tick mark here and a tick mark here. Remember, the tick marks mean these two segments are congruent. So if RT is 21.7, TS is also 21.7. They didn't ask for the length of TS, they asked for the length of RS. They want the whole thing. So if I want RS, I'm going to do 21.7 plus 21.7. And I'm going to get RS is 43.4. There were no units associated with what was given to me, so I don't have to worry about putting any units on my answer as far as feet or centimeters or anything like that. That's example 1. Example 2. Now, sometimes you're going to have to read the problem and get some clues from the words. Example 2. C is the midpoint of segment BD. That means C bisects it. It cuts it in half. C is the midpoint of segment BD. Find the length of BC. Okay? So first off, we're going to have to set up an algebra problem, solve it for x, and then plug it back in. If C is the midpoint, now they told me it's the midpoint, they also put these tick marks. If C is the midpoint, that means segment BC is congruent to segment CD. If my segments are congruent, that means their lengths are equal. Now, BC is 3x minus 2 equals CD is 2x plus 3. From there, we just do the algebra. Now, how you might do your algebra and how I might do the algebra might vary slightly, but we should get to the same answer. I get x equals 5. Now, I'm not done. They didn't ask for x. They didn't say solve for x. They said find the length of BC. That means you have to take this 5 and plug it back in for the length of BC. Here's BC right here. So I'm going to take this 5 and plug it in for that x right there. 3 times 5 minus 2. 3 times 5 is 15, minus 2. The length of BC is 13. Now, technically we're done. We can stop, move on to the next problem, right? But you want to make sure you got that 100%. You want that A. Take this 5, and just for fun, to check our work, I'm going to plug it in here. I'm just going to do this real mentally, real quick in my head. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 3 is 13. They should come out the same. This is the middle, so both of these should be equal. If you plug in your 5 here, and you got something other than 13, either this is wrong, or something went wrong when you substitute it back in. Go back, check your algebra. Example 3, now we're going to utilize the midpoint formula for the coordinate plane. Midpoint formula, I'm going to jot it down real quick. I like to write down formulas, it's how I learn them. Remember, midpoint is you add your x's divided by 2, add your y's divided by 2. There's your middle. So if the endpoints of segment PR are P is at negative 2, 5, and R is at 4, 3, find the coordinates of the midpoint. Now, what I like to do, even to this day, is I will label my coordinates. You got to keep in mind, folks, every coordinate has one x and one y value. An x value and a y value. Now, doesn't matter if this is, I consider this the first one and this the second one, or if I consider this one the first one and this one the second one, it does not matter. The middle is still the middle. So I'm just going to take it as I read it, that this is my x1, this is my y1, this is my x2, this is my y2. I like to label them so that I know where my x's and y's are going in this formula. So I'm going to work on that over here. x1 plus x2, well that's negative 2 plus 4. Divided by 2, comma, now I'm going to put my y's in. y1 plus y2, so I'm going to have 5 plus 3 divided by 2. Now I'm just going to do some mental math. Negative 2 plus 4, just watch your positive negative numbers. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, comma, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 divided by 2 is 4. So my midpoint is at 1, comma 4. And that's where we stop, don't do anything else. Now I had both endpoints, I found the middle. What if I'm given one endpoint and the middle, I gotta find the other end? That's what we're gonna look at right here. I have the midpoint here, is right here. M is 3, 4. One endpoint is at 1, 6. So I'm going to say this is my x1, y1. Find C. Find x2, y2. Where is x2, y2? So I'm still utilizing the midpoint formula. Notice though, I only have one x value to plug in, I only have one y value to plug in. So, plugging those in, x1 is 1 plus x2, because I don't know what that is, divided by 2, comma, I know my y1 is 6 plus y2 divided by 2. I don't know these values, but I do know where the middle is. So let's see if I put the midpoint down here. I know that when I take 1 plus some number and then divide it by 2, I should get to 3. And then 6 plus some number when divided by 2, I should get to 4. So I'm going to use that information to set up an algebra problem. 1 plus x2 divided by 2 should give me a 3. 6 plus some y value divided by 2 should give me a 4. Now I just have two separate algebra problems, one to find the x, one to find the y. So, in order to solve this, the first thing you want to do is get rid of this divided by 2. The opposite of division, divide, or multiply. 1 plus x2 equals 6. 1 plus what gives you 6? Here's I need to get myself enough room here. X sub 2 equals 5. Same process over here. To get rid of this divide by 2, I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. 6 plus y2 should give me an 8. 6 plus what is 8? So my x2 was at 5, my y2 is at 2, so C should be at the point 5, comma 2. And that's how you find the other endpoint given one endpoint and the midpoint. The more you practice this, the quicker you'll get, the more you'll notice there's a small little pattern that you can probably do in your head quicker than writing all this down. I'm not going to give away that secret just yet. Okay, last example, then I'm going to let you try some problems on your own. What is the approximate length of segment RT with endpoints R at 3, 2 and T at negative 4, 3? Now, if they're asking for the approximate length, length is another word for distance. So that means I'm using my distance formula. The distance formula is a very large formula, but it's very simple. Arithmetic involved in it. The square root of x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. Now again, I'm going to label x1, y1, and x2, y2 in my problem so I know where they're going in this formula here, because it is kind of a big formula. So I'm going to say x1, y1, and here I'm going to say x2, y2. So here where I have x sub 2 minus x sub 1, I know that's going to be negative 4 minus 3. So again, x sub 2 minus x sub 1, negative 4 minus 3. Close the parentheses, squared, plus, parentheses, y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. So y sub 2 is 3, minus 2 squared. Now, it's basic arithmetic. I'm going to show you every single step so nobody gets lost here. Watch your positive negatives. Negative 4 minus 3 is negative 7 squared plus, parentheses, 3 minus 2 is 1 squared. Square both of your numbers. Negative 7 squared is positive 49. Folks, when you move from this step to this step, you should have no more negatives left at all, because anything squared is positive. So negative 7 squared is 49, plus 1 squared is 1. Add those together, you get the square root of 50. Last step, square root of 50 is approximately 7.1. Now, some key things here. I've already pointed out one of them. When I go from this step to this step, there's no more negatives left. They should be gone. Any negative squared is positive because it's negative 7 times negative 7. That's a positive. What else do you notice? In every single step, I wrote the square root symbol. Many times people forget to write it. They don't carry it all the way through. Then they get to the very end, they tell me the distance is 50. No, it's not. The distance is 7.1. Don't forget to take the square root at the end. You always take the square root at the end of the distance formula. Now, some problems for you to try on your own. Try these 5 problems on your own.